Hi, and welcome back. I'm Mike Quincy.
I'm Alex and Isaac.
And I'm Mike Monticello.
So, full disclosure, you guys, getting over a cold. Voice is not quite what it used to be. I'm not the golden voiced pitch man as usual. And we'll try not to disrupt this podcast too much. But I can't hold back because I'm so excited to talk about the 2024 Chevrolet Trax. That's on deck for today's podcast. And after taking 2023 off, Chevrolet redesigned the Trax compact SUV. And it kind of looks like an off-roader, but it's only offered with front-wheel drive, which is kind of wacky. It's a little bit longer. It's a little bit wider than the previous model. All versions come with 137 horsepower, 1.2-liter three-cylinder engine, matched to a 6-speed automatic transmission. The key selling point here, and we're going to get to this in just a second, is the Trax fairly low introductory price, starting around $21,495 with the destination fee. And good news is automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection is standard. The so-so news is blind spot warning and rear cross traffic warning are optional. We bought a 1LT model, which stickers at $22,300, and we added the driver convenience package, which includes the aforementioned blind spot warning, rear cross traffic warning, and adaptive cruise control. We also put on the LT convenience package, which adds heated seats and a steering wheel, among other features. And with the destination fee, the bottom line came to what I think is a fairly reasonable $24,680.
You mean a heated steering wheel, not just a steering wheel, right?
A heated steering wheel, heated seats and steering wheel. Maybe I should have written that differently, but the point is,
it does have a steering wheel.
You get your hands heated up in the winter with our little Chevrolet Trax here.
Right.
So with that preamble, Alex, I'm going to throw it right over to you and get your first impressions of how this little SUV drives.
Yeah, I mean, first off, it's like kind of a modern automotive engineering marvel in some ways that you get so much stuff for the money, right? You mentioned the, relatively speaking anyway, low cost and the $25,000 to get the heated seats, the heated steering wheel, all the safety things that you mentioned, the blind spot and the ACC and, the infotainment system's not just some black and white little screen up on the right.
It's 11 inches. It's good size. It's pretty impressive looking.
Right. Fully digital dashboard with the center screen. And in terms of the content that you're getting here for the money, it's quite amazing, actually. I do think there's maybe it's a little questionable how well all of the things work that you're getting, but ultimately you are getting a lot of stuff. And that means that they had to compromise somewhere, right?
Yes.
And I do think that there are some compromises with maybe how comfortable the car is and how it drives. It drives okay, don't get me wrong. It's a modern 2024 vehicle after all, so it is safe and it drives well enough, but it's not exactly the most inspiring vehicle. And I think the powertrain is a little maybe let down by the transmission, which we can get into. But so I think, overall, you're really paying to get a lot of different features, and some of them are good, some of them are bad, but and you're sacrificing maybe the driving experience a little bit. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it actually, consider it's such a small engine. I mean, it's a 1.2-liter three-cylinder turbo,
it
right?
does really well.
137 horsepower. It actually moves down the road really well when you need it to. Two-lane passing zones are not a big deal. But it's got the big hang up for me is it has just some power delivery issues.
Yeah.
So
Probably from the 6-speed.
yeah. So, I mean, like from the good part, it doesn't have a delay when you leave the line from a full stop. Okay. So that's good. We're seeing cars that have delays, especially when they have a turbo involved. The engine start system fires, back up quickly with minimal shudder. Those are some of the good things. And if you drive like with a light throttle foot, it's a very different vehicle than if you drive, say, so I look at it like 30% throttle or less, which is pretty light. It drives well. But it's when you come into a rolling stop where you go to get going again, or when you're, say, turning from one road onto another, you've slowed down, now you're getting back on the throttle. There can be huge delays when that happens. If you drive with a heavier throttle foot, say 40, 50, 60% throttle, Now you get some issues where it seems like initially is starting off okay, and then the power comes on strong, like it comes on abruptly, and it just does it in a non-linear fashion. And at those kind of harder throttle openings, the upshifts become a little more noticeable as well.
Yeah,
and then the other thing is that we see this with a lot of vehicles. They want to upshift as quickly as possible for fuel economy, right? But being a 3-cylinder, which is not just inherently is not the smoothest configuration ever. It just isn't. Like a 4-cylinder is going to be smoother. 6-cylinder is going to be smoother. So the engine gets into some of these 1600, 1700, 1800 RPM lugging points, and then the transmission's just not responsive to downshifting. So because you want to get out of that, right? Either A, you want it to do it on its own. You realize I don't want to be down there.
Maybe the grade of the road.
Right. 2, you give it a little more throttle, and we're used to transmissions that nearly instantly downshift, and it doesn't do that. You have to kind of prod the throttle a lot more than with most transmissions.
And so when we're talking about the engine and transmission working together and the kind of the delay or the stumble, is any of this have anything? I mean, back in the early days of turbocharged engine, we used to call it turbo lag. But you think this is more of a transmission issue than a spooling up the turbo issue?
Yeah, I think
I'm sure. Yeah, there's probably some optimization of the tuning that could happen there to make sure that the engine's working in harmony a little bit more with the transmission. But I think for me, some of it just came, especially considering the modern vehicles that have 8, 9, 10 speed transmissions, right? This is working with 6, which totally serviceable, don't get me wrong. But if you're tuning it to upshift, like you said, Monty, as quickly as possible to get into that highest gear for fuel economy reasons, you just have less ratios to work with. So you end up dropping the RPMs quite high. And because now the spread between your gears is larger, by the time you prod the throttle to try to get it downshift, that next gear is quite a bit further away than maybe some of these other transmissions with
causing some of that bump you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Okay.
The RPMs are going to rise quite a bit more in that type of thing. So, nice little 3-cylinder. And I personally think the 3-cylinder is kind of cool. Like we're so overburdened with 4 cylinders these days.
It's not a Toyota Corolla GR 3-cylinder.
It's not that.
But it's not. It has kind of an interesting kind of gravelly note to it. That I'm kind of the more 3-cylinders we drive, I think kind of like the more I'm kind of liking them a little bit.
Right.
I think my expectations were kind of low going into it. I was assigned to this car a few weeks ago, and I was going off for a long weekend with my wife into the countryside of New Jersey. You don't think, New Jersey and country, but they're actually really beautiful parts of New Jersey. And so I wasn't really expecting much. I was expecting noisy. I was expecting it to be unresponsive. And I actually found it very pleasant. I was very surprised at what a decent cruiser this was. And we can get into, how the seats work and how the driving position works, because I know we all have opinions about that.
Sure.
But just from the time that I spent with this vehicle, I actually we were driving down the road, and I said to my wife, I was like, go into the glove box and look at the window sticker. And I said, tell me how much this cost.
Yeah.
And she said, it's like $24,000. And I thought, wow, this is really a lot of vehicle for $24,000. And I don't mean to reiterate what you just said.
Unquestionably.
But when Alex, when you were doing that ramp up, talking about the value of this, sometimes our conversations go to, well, you could get a decent used car for this and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But you know what you're getting with this new car? You're getting like a warranty, which is pretty cool.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in terms of like long-term cruising, it's maybe not my first choice for that type of thing. I think the ride is way better than I expected, right? My expectations, particularly for the ride, were very low going into it, just because there's only so much you can do in terms of tuning and tires and suspension design, at this type of price. But I do think it did a lot better than I expected, but it just didn't feel all that secure to me on the highway. So when you're driving, especially around here where some of our highways have like longer sweeping turns and you might hit a bump mid-turn, things like that. So while it wasn't uncomfortable, I felt like I was almost floating on top of the road rather than connected to it. So it just didn't feel the most confidence inspiring, I guess, on some of those types of highways. So,
and do you think that that's a suspension issue or just a short wheelbase issue?
No, actually the wheelbase, we have other compact or subcompact crossovers in our fleet right now that have similar wheelbases and don't really exhibit that exact type of behavior. So I think it's more of a tuning type of thing.
And Monty, what did you think of the seat?
This one was interesting. So it's interesting. Well, first of all, it's on the hard side. So that's a big part of why it's uncomfortable to me. And what I wrote in our digital logbook was this was the first car I noticed this hip support waning over time that Gabe Shenhar talks about all the time. I never knew what that wackadoodle was talking about. I'm kidding. He's not a wackadoodle. I never knew what he was talking about. Hip support waning.
Right.
And I realized that it was like down low. It was just, I didn't have any support. And so
like your hip just kind of starts hurting a little bit, right?
Yeah. And then, the bottom cushion, it doesn't have much, like side bolstering. So your legs, it doesn't really hold your legs in place, and you can't adjust the leading edge of the bottom cushion up and down. Now, keep in mind, this is a relatively inexpensive car, so you can only judge it so harshly. But the reality is, if this is the seat you're getting, you're stuck with that seat. And if it doesn't work for you, which it doesn't work for me, that's going to be a problem down the road. Now, that's why you need to go sit in the car, because some people it might work. It didn't work for me. And then the other thing kind of along those lines is that the driving position is a little cramped. There's the center console is plastic, as most of them in this price range are. You can't expect them to put padding there. It'd be nice if they would, but it's just hems in your right knee, so you feel a little squished. And then it has plastic door armrests. Now, at any price point, you can put at least a layer of vinyl or something on the door armrest. But
just
the door
that
armrest,
squishy foam that they kind of been using on tops of dashboards these days.
It's just plastic.
Like that.
So that makes me then, try to put my my right elbow up on the windowsill instead, which I don't want to do. So basically, there was nowhere for me to put it that was comfortable. And honestly, that's just a problem at any price.
Right. No, that's a very fair point. And some of the bits of the fit and finish are just okay. But again, keeping it relative to the price point. And as we were getting ready to shoot this podcast, Alex and I both noticed, Monty's shirt with the little yellow stripe across, which kind of is like the little trim bits in the tracks. And I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, but
nothing I do is intentional, Quince.
It's a really nice detail.
Can I just back up a little bit, because I feel like I'm being a little negative here, and I am negative on some aspects of the driving position, but there's other aspects that are good. Like, it has plenty of headroom. It has a good view out over the hood, which we're not seeing.
Good visibility.
Clear view of the gauges. I know that's something you and I are finding in a lot of cars these days. You have a round steering wheel and a rectangular instrument panel.
Really long.
Guess what? That doesn't work. So it does have some things that are good. I don't want to say that it's all negative. Just for me, the negative parts are the ones that would keep me from buying it. But there are definitely some good aspects of it. But back to the color combo.
The color combo, I don't know. We ended up with a weird spec. It's a brown exterior. I'm sure you're looking at it right now in the expertly shot B-roll from Tolly.
Anatoly the Great.
That's right.
Get it right.
So this brown exterior, and then it has like gray wheels that, because they're gray and the exterior is brown, it looks like they tried to make them match, but they don't quite match. And then you open the door and it's got the green trim, and it's just, for me, there are other colors that could have worked a little bit better with the green trim, but
it's not quite off-putting, but
they had to try it, and it does make it look a little bit, it's not just a sea of black, with no details. So that's great.
So before we move to the back seat, I think one of the high marks of the Trax are its controls, and again, onto the value proposition that we talked about with this car is the Trax comes with wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Now, Alex, you in particular had some experiences with this, both positive and negative about the controls and the connectivity. So take it away.
Yeah, there are definitely some positives, right? There's a lot of physical controls here. Regular gear selector is nice and easy. No figuring that out, really. Physical climate, knobs and buttons, all great. Steering wheel is also pretty easy to use. But yeah, the screens and the connectivity portion, like you said, it not common to, or at least not expected necessarily to get wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay at this price. Very cool. I just found them to be a little unreliable. And that's kind of what I meant earlier about, like, you get all these features, but maybe some of them don't work the best, right? Just multiple times where either getting into the car and it doesn't, most of these systems, once you set them up, like, it should load wireless CarPlay when the car starts, right? That's typically how these work. It usually fails to do that in my experience. And then I had a couple of times where I'm like on a phone conversation or something like that, and it just drops connectivity altogether. And then the vehicle has to be shut off and restarted to be able to reconnect. So just some of those. And personally, like I can forgive a lot of the other stuff that we talked about, but that's something that would annoy me a lot when I'm trying to use this system. And in the showroom, this looks great. These two screens, they're big, they're clear, they look great. But then when it comes down to using them, a little bit of frustration. And they're not all bad. I mean, there are some other features there that work pretty well, but just that wireless connectivity for me was spotty. I don't know if you guys experienced that.
It didn't happen to me, but I totally get that would be super annoying, especially a brand new car, 2024 model year, to have issues like that. But I did love that it's all physical climate controls. We're seeing more and more what we call touch capacitive, basically non-button buttons on a panel, and these just that part of it to make it so easy like that. Loving that, and so that part of the controls is fantastic.
I think the word you're looking for is refreshing.
Refreshing, absolutely.
I'm an Android Auto user. I generally don't like wireless connections for Android Auto because my phone is not that old. It works actually pretty well, but I'm always doing a wired approach, and that was always flawless for me. I didn't have any issues.
Yeah, this was only with the wireless, and yeah. Also, my phone is not too old. A few years, but nothing crazy.
Still, if you bought this car and you wanted to do the wireless, that would be annoying. That would cause me to have to go back to the dealer and say there's something wrong here. So I mean, and honestly, Chevrolet is not always known for stellar reliability. We obviously don't have any reliability data on this yet, but we have corporate reliability on Chevrolet and General Motors and other things that you can find at consumerreports.org. And let's move on to the rear seat.
The rear seat, I think, is surprisingly roomy for what is a pretty small vehicle,
It's a very wide car relative to like its overall dimensions, right? It's quite wide and low. And I think you get a little bit more lateral space on the inside.
Yeah, it's quite a bit bigger than the last Trax.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And, so, I mean, headroom's not bad. Good foot space underneath the front seats, which we're not seeing in a lot of vehicles. The seat has some amount of contouring to help hold you in place. Leg support's okay, and the seat back is at a rake that's relatively comfortable. So I mean, that part they kind of got pretty well dialed.
Right, and then combine that with a pretty spacious trunk with, again, a super wide opening, which is awesome for being able to chuck stuff in if you have a really big space, but kind of an inconveniently shaped access to it, right? That's potentially no good. So this is good use of that, and then fold down seats and all that stuff. So from a practicality standpoint, I think it's doing well there.
So consumers have a lot of choices when it comes to kind of small SUVs, smallish SUVs. Do you think that the lack of all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive is going to somehow turn off any of these buyers?
I mean,
or did Chevrolet make a good move by just saying we're not even going to bother?
I think in isolation, it's actually okay, but where it gets a little strange for me is that they also sell the Trailblazer. Right, which is more expensive.
Similarly sized.
Yeah, a little smaller, in fact, a little bit smaller than the Trax, but more expensive. But you can get it with all-wheel drive. So really, that's like, I guess the only reason I would go with maybe the Trailblazer, because it's also got a 3-cylinder. I mean, if you get the all-wheel drive, you get a 9-speed, which is that's pretty good. But it's a little weird that those two vehicles, I guess, coexist at the same time. We kind of thought that maybe the Trailblazer was going to replace the Trax altogether, but that wasn't the case, right? Here's the new one. So, but I don't think I think there's a lot of places, and maybe we're a little, in Connecticut, all-wheel drive is more prevalent, but other parts of the country and even other parts of the world, right, where all-wheel drive isn't as necessary. So,
now, if you look at how big the car market is in Southern California, you definitely don't need all-wheel drive there.
Right.
Florida, I mean, none of those places.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you need all-wheel drive? And so for those people, that's fine. Front-wheel drive's totally fun.
And it keeps the weight down. It keeps the vehicle simple. It reduces build complexity, right, which can hopefully go back into the purchase price of the vehicle being less. So
a little better fuel economy.
Right. Yeah. And as we've said many times on this podcast, a front-wheel drive car with good winter tires can be better than an all-wheel drive car with just kind of so-so tires.
Yeah,
it all
definitely.
comes down to the tires. Glad you brought up fuel economy as we're putting miles on this car and we start testing it. That's going to be one of the things I think we're definitely going to be looking at, be interested in when an automaker goes with a small 3-cylinder engine. The idea is, well, let's maximize fuel economy. And here at Consumer Reports, well, it's exactly what we're doing. We're going to test it, see how it goes. And you can check out consumerreports.org for our first drive of the Trax. And we're going to have more on this vehicle as we do our testing and run through it. Well, that about do it for this episode, which was produced by, of course, super producer Dave Abrams and edited by Anatoly the Great Shumsky. As always, check the show notes for more information on the vehicles and topics that we've discussed. Just a reminder, keep your questions coming to talkingcars@icloud.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.